I'd like to call the City of Wheat Ridge Planning Commission for January 18th, 2018 to order. Can I get a roll call for members, please?
Alan Bucknam,
Present.
Emery Dorsey,
Present.
Janet Leo, here. Scott Ohm,
Here.
Amanda Weaver, Vivian Voss,
Present.
Dirk Bowden, and Donna Kimsey are absent tonight.
The next order on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there a motion to approve the order of the agenda?
Chair, I move to approve the order.
Can I get a second? Second. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda? Call for a vote.
Motion passed 6-0.
Is there a motion to approve the order of the minutes for December 7, 2017?
I make the motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Can I get a second? Are there any additions or corrections to the order of the minutes? Call for a vote.
Motion passed 5-0 with one abstaining.
We will now open up the public forum. This is the time for any person to speak on any subject not appearing on tonight's agenda, which is a case. Is there anybody signed up for that? Okay, thank you. We will close the public forum. I'd like to welcome the members of the public and ask that you respect the statements made by city staff, the applicant, and my fellow planning commissioners during the proceedings. It is important that the public meeting be conducted in a dignified and respectful manner. Please do not clap, yell, boo, make commentary from the audience, or otherwise disrupt the proceedings. We as sitting members take the role, responsibilities, and duties of planning commissioners very seriously. When we as planning commissioners review site plans, zoning, and other land use requests during a public hearing, the planning commission is sitting as a quasi-judicial body. I now would like to open up the public hearing for case number WZ-16-07, an application filed by Evergreen Clear Creek Crossing, LLC, of a zone change from planned commercial development, PCD, to planned mixed-use development, PMUD, with an outline development plan, design pattern book, and vision book on property located west of I-70 between Clear Creek and 34th Avenue. And before I ask for the staff report, we need to start by swearing in anybody who plans to speak with the applicant, staff, and anyone from the public who plans to testify or comment. Please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth and the matter as you know it? Thank you. Now I ask for the staff report.
Alrighty. Good evening. For the record, my name is Zach Wallace-Mendez, with a planner with the Wheat Ridge Community Development Department. Joining me today are Ken Johnstone, the Director of the Community Development Department, and Scott Brink, the Public Works Director. I will be presenting on behalf of the staff group that has been working on this project. At the conclusion of my presentation, usually I stay up here, but this time I'll go sit back down and all three of us can field any questions that you have, since it's been a large project and a group effort. This is case number WZ-16-07. As Mr. Ohm mentioned, a request for approval from for a zone change from planned commercial development to planned mixed-use development with an outline development plan, design pattern book, and vision book. I would like to enter into the public record the contents of the case file, the zoning ordinance, the comprehensive plan, and this digital presentation.
So noted.
And the property is located within the city of Wheat Ridge. All appropriate notification and posting requirements have been met. Therefore, the Planning Commission does have jurisdiction to hear the case. The property is located west of I-70, between approximately 34th Avenue and Clear Creek. There is a portion that extends north of Clear Creek, kind of in the elbow between Highway 58 and I-70. 40th Avenue is an underpass that connects Youngfield to the site, although it just connects now to the Youngfield Service Road. This is the same aerial image with the city's zoning map overlaid. So as was mentioned, the current zoning is planned commercial development for this site. To the north, there's a planned industrial development, and then a scattering of uses to the east, or on the east side of I-70. To the southwest is unincorporated Jefferson County, so much of the residences in that area are in unincorporated Jefferson County. As a reminder, planned developments are typically for very specific development scenarios, and they don't have a sunset date. In this case, the current planned commercial development was approved for the property for a Cabela's and a Super Walmart, in addition to other range of uses. Those users and the former developer are no longer in the picture, so a zone change is necessary, as the previous approval was actually very specific to those two users. I won't say what I said again, but essentially the previous approval from 2011 is a very highway-oriented retail, commercial, office, and warehouse development. It, again, was centered on a Cabela's and Super Walmart site. The proposed mixed-use development is a lot more flexible. It will continue to allow many highway-oriented retail, commercial, and office uses, while proposing to expand the use chart to include residential, entertainment, and other employment uses in a very live, work, play environment. The emphasis on placemaking is also much stronger in this proposed zoning than it was in previous approvals for this property. And I'll go over the pieces of this planned mixed-use development because it entails a little bit more than we're typically used to seeing. For this project, we are reviewing an outline development plan with a design pattern book and vision book. So just as a quick reminder, the commissioners have reviewed many plan developments before, so you know that there's two pieces to every plan development. The first part is the outline development plan, which we're reviewing today, and then, if approved, later will come a specific development plan. So let me describe these three documents in detail. The 4-page ODP establishes land use concepts, circulation, and the general character of the development. There's an excerpt here from the ODP document. This ODP divides the property into 8 planning areas, which you can see divided up here, as well as the arrows which signify circulation concepts that we will use moving forward in the application if it does move forward. On the later pages of this ODP document is a list of uses. There's 2 pages of uses that are allowed. The planning areas each have different uses that are allowed in them. So what might be allowed in planning area 1 might not be allowed in planning area 6. The design pattern book is a type of document we don't typically see with developments in Wheat Ridge, but it's not uncommon for a development of this size. The book establishes specific development standards for each of the planning areas, as well as standards for architecture, public space, landscaping, parking, bike parking, and the list goes on and on. As you have the document in front of you, it's a pretty long and lengthy document. It's very similar in form and function to the city's architectural and site design manual, so we would use it in the same way, just specifically for this property. The ODP and the design pattern book are regulatory documents, so if they are approved, they essentially are the zoning documents for this property. The third item is a vision book. This vision book is less regulatory in nature. It was important in the process of developing the plans for this property and determining, what exactly this next iteration of Clear Creek Crossing looks like. And it will be helpful in sharing that vision with potential future tenants of the property, assuming approval of this zone change. So as I mentioned, there's 8 planning areas in this development. I'll go through each of the development standards pretty briefly. I won't go through line by line, as is in your in the development pattern book that you have in front of you. But planning area 1 is located north of 40th Avenue, adjacent to I-70. It has a wide array of commercial and retail uses. Auto-oriented uses are not permitted in this area. It also permits residential, public, hospital, office, hospitality, and entertainment uses. So it has a good orientation towards the highway, so there's a wide array of uses that are allowed. The orientation of this property just very generally will be oriented towards Clear Creek Drive with a secondary orientation towards 40th Avenue. So we'll be looking for somewhat of a build-to along Clear Creek Crossing and 40th Avenue with some flexibility, as you can see in the design pattern book. One other thing to note in this planning area and several others, there's a plaza gathering space and public art requirement that will be required to be fulfilled when they come in for an SDP application. Planning Area 2 is located to the northwest of Planning Area 1. It has a slightly more limited array of commercial and retail uses as it's not highway adjacent and situated very north along Clear Creek Drive. The focus of this property will be either to Clear Creek, the actual creek, taking advantage of that amenity, or Clear Creek Drive, depending on the uses that end up on this property. Again, this property does have the plaza gathering area and public art requirement. Planning Area 3 is adjacent to I-70 and south of 40th Avenue. Wide array of commercial and retail uses, including some auto-oriented uses, in addition to office, hospitality, entertainment uses. Again, the primary frontage is Clear Creek Drive, with secondary being along 40th Avenue, with some increasing setbacks from I-70 just so it's not towering over I-70. This planning area does also have the plaza gathering area public art requirement. Planning Area 4 is located south. It is split into two, and what is in between them is the proposed hook ramps from I-70 that were funded as part of the 2E ballot measure from 2016. So this is a very auto-oriented area, and the permitted uses reflect that. The building orientation is more typical of suburban development with setbacks ranging from 10 to 15 feet. There's no build-tos or any kind of this in this area. Planning Area 5 is one of the first properties you enter if you're traveling north on Clear Creek Drive, or the future Clear Creek Drive. Wide array of commercial, retail uses, again, residential, office, hospitality, entertainment uses. One important thing to note here is there is a required 20-foot landscape buffer adjacent to the lower density residential that you can see to the southwest of the property, so along this boundary here. Planning Area 6, very similar to Planning Area 5 in terms of uses. Staff does want to see the buildings and they're oriented towards the pedestrian pathways that connect to the rest of the site. And this also does have the 20-foot landscaped setback requirement along this small portion where it's adjacent to the low density residential to the south. 7 again is very similar to 5 and 6. 5-foot setbacks per story, pretty typical suburban development. Finally, Planning Area 8 is the portion located kind of north of Clear Creek. The only uses permitted in this area are parks and open space, and then some minor utility uses and water storage. So there will be no development on this property, on this section. Parks and open space only. Got lost in my notes here, sorry. There was a neighborhood meeting held on December 6th of 2016. There were approximately 60 neighbors in attendance. The questions generally ranged from what are the potential tenants, number of units proposed in the residential portions, trail connections, and the like. The applicant has held additional neighborhood meetings as recently as earlier this month that are kind of outside the city process that they did just kind of in good faith and keeping the neighborhood engaged, as this was a long process. And they've also held additional meetings on a myriad of topics, including I-70, the hook ramps, potential transit access into the site, leasing focus groups, all those kinds of things that go into making a project like this work. As with every zone change, there was a public posting and notification requirement. We did not receive any letters until today. We received one letter of support that was passed out on the dais in front of you when you arrived. We did receive one phone call or one message. I returned that phone call, but never heard a call back. So I don't know. But they were asking about this public hearing actually. So hopefully that person made it. With every land use case that we have, we send this out on referral to all of the affected agencies, as the city of Wheat Ridge is not a full-service city. We actually did multiple referrals throughout this case, which is not typical. We went through the full list twice, and then for the third referral, we sent it to a select few who had some outstanding comments. The list you see here is not inclusive of all of the notified agencies, but only the agencies who responded with comments, so I'll just go through those really quick. The majority of comments were informational or pretty standard comment letters that we received for all of our cases. Any concerns raised were addressed through subsequent reviews. So quickly, the applicant has been working with Applewood Sanitation on providing service to the site. CenturyLink simply noted that they had no comments or objections. Jefferson County Planning and Zoning actually had pretty extensive comments and recommendations, many of which came from the perspective of the low density residential areas that are to the southwest of this property. And the majority of those comments were addressed pretty early on in the process. Urban Drainage saw an opportunity with Clear Creek and noted that they wanted to be part of helping shape the improvements along the creek front. Jeffco Schools provided their standard comment letter, which just stated, which area schools would serve this property. Jeffco Public Health also provided just a standard comment letter that addressed air quality, environmental site assessment, active living, and uses that would be regulated by the county health department. So it's their pretty standard, typical comment letter. West Metro Fire had no comments or concerns. We usually see more substantive comments from them at SDP level, or when we're platting, so they can make sure that they have right-of-way and easements where necessary. Excel commented requesting utility easements, which will be addressed at the time of the platting of this property. That doesn't go into an outline development plan. So if this application is approved for the zone change in the outline development plan with design pattern book and vision book, the next step in the process would be, or the next steps in the process would be a subdivision plat to replat the property, replat right-of-way as needed for this specific development scenario. Conducting a subdivision improvement agreement, that way the city and the developer are on the same page about when utilities and public infrastructure need to be constructed, in relation to building construction and certificates of occupancy and things like that. Additionally, they will have to go through a specific development plan review. For a site this large, we would expect to see multiple specific development plans, probably one for each planning area or something like that. As a reminder, when the plan development process is split into two pieces, the ODP and the SDP separately, Planning Commission will review every specific development plan that staff receives as an application, and you will be the final deciding body. So the outline development plan will continue on to City Council for their final decision, but the specific development plan will be brought to you for your decision, final decision. As an added element to the specific development plan review, the developer has proposed an architectural control committee. The committee will include representatives selected by both the developer and the city, as well as a member of city staff. The committee will review projects prior to SDP application submittal to ensure that they are architecturally compliant with the guiding documents before you today. The city has not seen this type of committee before, but again, it's not uncommon for a project of this size. And it just helps facilitate a clear, consistent, and predictable process for kind of all of the parties involved in development. So as the commissioners are aware, one of the criteria for a zone change is consistency with the comprehensive plan. So there's an excerpt of the plan on the screen in front of you, which shows the site here. It's basically centered on where the regional commercial circle is. So this site has 3 different comprehensive plan designations. One is the regional commercial center, underlaid with the mixed-use commercial, and then the northern portion of the property is, of course, the green belt and parks and open space. The language from the comprehensive plan, which I have written out in full in your staff report, but I won't read verbatim here, was clearly influenced by the original 2005 Cabela's plan for this property. It speaks to one or two large acre tenants with smaller complementary retail and employment uses scattered in the periphery. The intent of the commercial designations, despite that, staff feels that this proposal in front of you today meets the intent of both the regional commercial center and the mixed-use commercial designations, as it does provide a mix of commercial uses across the property. Although there isn't an anchor tenant proposed as of now, it will be kind of anchored by a series of smaller tenants, or at least that's my understanding of kind of what the development scenario looks like at this point in time. The major component that was not anticipated for the site at the time of the comprehensive plan in 2009 was residential use. However, since the comp plan was written, the region and the country have endured the Great Recession, and the world of retail commercial development has changed quite dramatically. The housing market also is experiencing quite a lack of supply, as I'm sure we're all aware. And the contemporary expectation of regional developments is that they accommodate a desire to live, work, play, that theme that you often see in a mixed-use environment. So while the current development plans differ slightly from the comp plan designation of solely commercial, staff feels that the inclusion of residential components and smaller tenants anchoring the site, as opposed to two large ones, is indicative of the changes in the retail market, as well as the changing housing demand, employment locations, and smaller retails in the metro area marketplace. The comp plan, again, is nearly 10 years old, and is in the public interest to approve a zone change that responds to these changes that I just mentioned in the metro area marketplace. Just quickly, I'll flash these up and I won't read them. These are the outline development plan criteria. So health, safety, general welfare. The proposed development is not feasible under any other zone district, which is why a planned district is being proposed. There's adequate infrastructure and facilities on the site, or there will be, and the change of zone is in conformance with the comprehensive plan goals, objectives, and policies. So staff recommends approval of the zone change from planned commercial development to planned mixed-use development for the following reasons. We find that it does promote the health, safety, and general welfare. It will not result in a significant adverse effect on the surrounding area. It will be adequately served by public infrastructure and utilities, as is detailed pretty thoroughly in the staff report. It is consistent with the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan, in addition to providing for a community need that was not anticipated at the time of the comprehensive plan adoption. Excuse me. It also provides a circulation network that is supportive of the city's goals related to bike and ped connectivity, which we recently passed the bike and pedestrian plan. So this is just another reason for staff to support the project. We would add one condition to the approval, and that would be to add residential heights to planning area 1 of 65 feet. That height is consistent with the adjacent planning area. It was just an oversight that residential is allowed in planning area 1, but there was no height specified for that specific use. So staff would recommend approval with one condition, and we can go over that again kind of once we loop back to that point in the hearing. So at this point, I'll take a seat and we can answer, Ken, Scott, and I can answer any questions that you have on these documents, or kind of anything that's in the staff report. And then the applicant is, of course, here and prepared to make a presentation as well, if you desire.
Thank you. Commissioner Bucknam?
I just have one relatively minor question, just regarding the design pattern book standards related to bicycle parking. How do the standards, when you were going through this, how do you think the standards on bike parking, in terms of the amount of parking, compare to what we have in the ASDM for things like a mixed-use neighborhood, for example?
Yeah, I might have to look that up. I know we did address this several months ago. I believe the standards are consistent with the mixed-use bike parking regulations, but I can double-check that really quick.
yeah, they looked roughly the same, but I was just wondering if that was something you had info on.
Yeah, so that was pretty intentional that we kind of pushed that, and the developer was open to, as they understand, this is a pretty 32nd and Clear Creek are pretty major bike paths in the city, so connecting them through the site or allowing a connection through the site and also to the site from those corridors was pretty important.
Okay, that's the only question I've got. Thanks.
Commissioner Dorsey?
The only question I had was on that hook ramp. I-70, that hook ramp's going to be the exit on, also the exit ramp for 32nd Avenue. Is the way it's close, anyway. I almost wonder if if the ramp were just an off-ramp into this project rather than a ramp onto I-70 there, where people could actually get on I-70 by going down the Clear Creek Drive to 32nd and then taking the actual on-ramp there on 32nd. The reason I bring this up is when you're driving on I-70, getting off on 32nd, the on-ramp is going to be actually the off-ramp for 32nd, and it's going to be a real scary situation, similar to what it is off of Ward Road there, where you take Highway 58 or stay on I-70, and if you're doing the Ward Road ramp going south, you really have a hard time getting over one lane, so you're not on 58 rather than I-70. If you want to go on I-70 is all I'm saying. That's a dangerous curve and a dangerous area there, a lot of accidents, and I get to wondering whether we actually need a hook ramp going up onto I-70 from this project. That's one of my questions. Anybody study that?
Yeah, this has actually been studied quite extensively, starting back in 2007 or so, when it was Cabela's kind of went through this whole exercise, and then we're revisiting it again now. It was all approved back then, and now with the different use and the phased approach, we're redoing that whole scoping with CDOT, and being it's an interstate highway, I-70, CDOT, Federal Highway Administration are all very closely involved with this. In fact, we have to get their blessing to have this done. So some of these concerns you're bringing up are valid, and CDOT through our consultant and their traffic analysis and their modeling, they've looked at these weave patterns and making sure that I-70 is not adversely affected, and making sure we're assuring that. And as you mentioned, if you're going westbound on I-70, to get off at 32nd, you'll use that hook ramp and go through the site, and then also to get back on to westbound, the other hook ramp there. Also, at 32nd Avenue, that existing signal on the west side of the bridge will go away. The ramp to go on to westbound I-70 at 32nd will still be there, but only if you're going east on 32nd. So if you're going west on 32nd and you want to get on I-70, you have to take a right and go into the development and get on there. So what it does is it gets rid of that traffic signal, and we get that whole interchange at 32nd Youngfield, both sides of the interstate, that even though we rebuilt it, it's better than it was. It still has some issues. It'll clean that up quite a bit as well.
So you're saying the 32nd and Youngfield ramp will go away going west to get on I-70 west, and that traffic will actually have to come through this development to get on to I-70?
Okay, now I get it. Yeah, the hook ramp to go back on to I-70 westbound actually there'll be a new bridge. It'll as it hooks to the west there to go on to I-70, it won't go directly on that, but it'll go over a new bridge over 32nd, adjacent to I-70, and then merge on later on. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood you there.
Okay.
Commissioner Vaz? Yeah, staff questions.
Well, I do have a few questions. Let me see if I'm at staff and not getting into the developer. Just let me know. Who could describe what employment use is versus, I guess, retail is what I would call most employment?
Sure. So I think just kind of off the cuff here, retail would be more places where folks are coming to shop, whereas an employment use is more of where people are going to work. So a typical office building would fall under employment, things like that, whereas retail would be more of retail, place where commerce happens, point of sale, essentially.
All right. And this is about, the whole total is about 170 acres? How much is this?
So the land included in the outline development plan is about 109 acres.
109 acres. And do we know how much each of the pad 1 through 8 encompasses each of them?
Yeah.
Are they, you can kind of tell they're not evenly split, but,
They're not, and it's on the second page of the outline development plan,
okay,
where it divides up the planning areas.
okay.
So planning area 1 is about 25.5 acres, 2 is about 14, 3 is 11, 4, of course, is split into 2 pieces, which are both about 3 apiece.
I see that, okay,
Yep.
all right. And so this use list that has been upgraded, I guess, included more use from another time?
Yeah, so
When
there's
was-
a bit of history with this property that I didn't get into too much. It was originally approved in '05 for Cabela's development, which ended up going away. Then came back in 2011 for a smaller Cabela's and a super Walmart with some additional retail around the edge. So those are the current approvals for this property.
Of use?
Yeah.
And those
yeah.
were probably 1 page instead of the 2 that we ended up with?
I think it still might have been 2, but it was really focused on retail and commercial, and I guess employment as well.
Okay.
Whereas this one does expand it a bit more into.
This one might include more of the employment
Yeah. So,
uses, whereas the first 2 did not have employment uses as the use.
they had a few,
A
yeah,
few.
but this one is definitely expanded in terms of the employment uses as well as residential. Residential is the big one that was
Right,
added.
that got added. So as you speak to residential, that's just going to be in 1 pad?
It's permitted in several districts,
Okay.
so I'm not sure
The
you know,
largest one
what that's going
is
to look like.
dedicated to the P2, I think,
Yeah.
where the townhomes or apartments or,
Yeah, so I think conceptually, and you may want to confirm with the developer, I think
Okay.
conceptually, planning area 2 is where they've envisioned residential, though of course, there are no approvals for this property, or
At
they're
this
several years old, so I don't think they have any of that,
and then,
in ink.
and then parking for any and all of these sites will be determined later based on what the usage is of that site?
Yeah, and they have actually spelled out parking requirements. I think they fall back to the city's code.
Right, and I did see that. but I
Yeah,
just
so
wanted
we'll
to make
assess
sure.
that when each one comes in.
So that'll come down
Yep.
later.
Yep, in the specific development plan stage.
All right, let's see. Let me know if this is developer pad 8. It said in some description around there, privately owned and maintained open space. So do we get to speak to who's privately owning that pad 8?
Yeah, you'll want to ask the developer. I'm
Okay,
not sure if they
that's fine.
intend to keep that themselves or, I don't know what the intention
Oh, okay,
is.
okay. I believe that's it for staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Leo?
Yeah, I don't really have any questions on it. I just think the information provided at this point was very thorough. Looking forward to the site plans as it goes forward.
Any other questions, Commissioner Leon? Commissioner Weaver? Could you speak in the microphone?
Yes. As far as the connectivity, what do you see the sort of major traffic, because we have Ward and we have the 30-second off-ramps. Where will most of this traffic be coming in and going out? Or do you feel like so I have a question about the car traffic, and then I have a question about, say I'm on my bike and I want to get from this development to the new TOD. Is there connectivity that way, just in light of some of the other conversations we've had in here regarding traffic and development over there? I'm just curious if that came up and sort of how you all envision those two exits plus bike traffic, sort of that increased both residential and business traffic.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. As far as the car traffic goes, most of it will be coming off of I-70. I don't recall the percentages and.
At Ward or at 32nd?
Well, into the site itself.
Okay.
Yeah. And as far as connectivity, bike and ped connectivity has been a big part of the conversation all through the public process. Whether it, especially with the Clear Creek Trail there, getting access to that, not only for the site itself and the people that would be living there, but the Applewood neighborhood and those neighborhoods further south, expressed a lot of comments regarding the need for that. So the developers worked quite closely to accommodate that on Clear Creek Drive with bike ped facilities, also from the Applewood Golf Course in that area there, making another trail that'll connect up to the creek from there. Then we've also been talking quite a bit with RTD about a transit center there.
It's just a difficult space right now.
Right.
If you're on a bike.
Yeah.
To get from like 38th and Youngfield.
Correct. Yeah.
To into all these areas, if you're not directly on the path.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mucknam?
Yeah, I had just one more question that occurred to me. I know there's a significant elevation change between the south side and the north side of this overall development. I think on the south side might be 50, 60 feet higher, right at I-70 and roughly 35th, compared to the Clear Creek bike path. And I know over in Area 5 here, which is in their Harvest District, commercial use, which includes retail, restaurant, and hotel, right along Clear Creek Drive. It's right adjacent to those some of those low-density residential areas. Is the reason for breaking this Area 5 out from Area 6 an elevation issue? Are we concerned at all about having higher maximum heights in this Area 5, since it is up a little higher compared to the Area 6, which is a little farther down slope?
Yeah, so for the first question, the intent, I believe, is definitely because of the grade change. So they can, feasibly put something on 6 and 5. The height, I guess, is the same in both 5 and 6. So yes, that is a good point. Sensitivity to the adjacent residential.
Yeah, I guess the concern I would have is, since the max building height is 65 feet over in Zone 5, which is identical to Zone 7 and 6, it's just that you might have something really, really tall, even with that 20-foot setback from that low-density residential, that might, on the north side from these residential areas just be much more present than, say, a 65-foot-high building down on Zone 6. So I guess that's a concern I have. Thanks for clarifying that for me.
Mr. Bucknam, just one additional point to add. Currently, Planning Area 5 actually sits in quite a hole. Now, that doesn't mean that couldn't change, but it too is quite a bit lower than the adjacent properties as well. So that there'd be kind of under the current kind of grading plan that would be proposed, there could be kind of a grade transition at the edge of, but at the I guess it'd be the southern edge of Planning Area 6. That there'd be a pretty significant grade change there as well. So kind of a tiering design between those two planning areas.
Okay, yeah, I'm seeing that the southern edge of Area 5 there, directly abuts the backyards of, that little cul-de-sac, those two little cul-de-sac areas there to the south. And I know there is I've been out there and I see there is that big grade change. I know in the original, the existing development, the Super Walmart was going to basically back up to that, and there was going to be load-in, load-out facilities, which would sort of be hidden and obscured. So I guess that's just a concern I would have moving forward. Maybe this might be more of a discussion for the SDP when we get to that phase, but that's just a concern I wanted to raise.
Very good.
All right.
I have a couple questions. So, Mr. Wallace-Mendez, refresh my memory, the voters in 2009 passed 2A and 2B, which was Ordinance 1452, which took away the height restriction of 35 feet of residential. And there are certain areas which was on it refers to the I-70 Kipling Corridor's final urban renewal map, figure number 1. So this area has been taken out of that area, correct?
It's exempted from the charter.
Exempted from the charter for height restrictions.
Yes.
I see a lot of, and it's been referred to as this is a mixed-use commercial, and so I guess some of the questions I have is we have a mixed-use commercial zone, and we also have a mixed-use commercial subdistrict, the interstate, which applies to 500 feet of I-70, which I would assume that could potentially apply. And you'll see where I'm going with this in a minute, but I've looked at the permitted use chart, and I've compared it to the mixed-use commercial, because that's basically what this is. And my understanding is the staff has spent a lot of time going through the mixed-use commercial and mixed-use commercial interstate permitted use charts, and the chart that is before us does not conform to that. Now, some of the areas, obviously 1, 3, 4, and 8 are along the interstate, and so they would, anything that was permitted in the mixed-use interstate would kind of make sense. There's some things, so as I look at this chart, one of the first ones I look at is a hospital. A hospital in PA1, under the mixed-use commercial interstate, that is a conditional use. This says it's permitted. And then, let's see here, under transit stations, public or private, my understanding there is no transit for this, and so I'm not sure why that would even be permitted. At best, that would maybe be a conditional. If we wanted to consider that be permitted, then do we need to think about the mixed-use commercial TOD, which does not permit duplexes because of density? And then as I continue to go down, auto service as an accessory to primary, it looks like most of those mixed-use commercial would be conditional, not permitted. And then, let's see here, banks, financial institutions, drive-through and drive-up, under the 5, 6, and 7, those would be conditional. Car washes would be a conditional, and it wouldn't, for PA4, and would not be permitted under 5, 6, and 7. I have a long list. I don't know if we want to go through that or not, but my point is that my understanding is why doesn't this match the mixed-use commercial? Because that's really what this is. Why are we giving more, I guess, leniency on some of these areas when it's been said that this is a regional employment mixed-use commercial I do understand the putting the condition for the height on some of those areas. I understand that, but I also understand that the mixed-use commercial zoning takes that into account. And we have a recent development on the corner of 38th and Wadsworth that is mixed-use commercial, and the site is entirely flat. But one could, per the zoning, build something within whatever that boundary was, and they'd have to stair-step that up development. So I guess I'm unclear why it's not the same, because that whole area was voter approved as far as taking the height out. So these are my questions. I'd be more than happy to hand over my red lines on this permitted uses. But obviously that was, I understand the applicant, why the applicant would want it, but I just want to know why the staff would approve these.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you certainly correctly note that the applicant developer is looking for a fair bit of flexibility, knowing that it's a 100-acre site that will develop over the course of many years, and potentially real estate market kind of ebbs and flows. I think we do look at something like a mixed-use commercial as a reference point. We actually had a conversation early on before they submitted the land use application of offering up that was one option that they could go to a mixed use. As has been alluded to, and I think the developer in their presentation will touch on as well, it's a challenging site. It's got a lot of different site influences. We want it to be a community asset and have placemaking, as Zach alluded to in his presentation, and we think there are opportunities to do that. At the same time, it's a highway site and lends itself to a wide variety of uses, in our opinion. The additional benefit of having a planned development in this case, as opposed to a mixed use, as the commission is aware, the mixed use projects move forward at an administrative level, and perhaps that's an argument for why you'd want less permissibility in terms of the use, the list of permitted uses, because those will all be projects that will be approved administratively, whereby in this case, every specific development plan will be reviewed by the Planning Commission and can have an opportunity during that process, that public hearing process, to review site compatibility of site design for what might be perceived to be higher intensity uses. I think the other argument for why the use chart might be more permissive is the project is also subjecting itself to additional design review process, both in terms of the process that you just mentioned, but also through a very extensive design pattern book, vision book, and architectural control committee. So I think those are the arguments that hopefully would offset kind of a concern potentially with an expanded list of uses. So it's a complex site, and could go in a lot of different directions in terms of what the end users look like.
And then thank you. And then one last question is, what percent of the total square footage contains residential uses at the ground floor level?
I don't think we know the answer to that, just in terms of, it's residential is allowed in planning area 1, planning area 2, I believe planning area 6 and 7 as well, or at least 6. So we don't know where that residential end up, and therefore how much residential might be allowed. One aspect of the project and the development that has not been entirely figured out yet, and is kind of on hold pending approval or potential approval of the zoning documents, is the development deal, right? If this is a public-private deal, if the city is investing additional dollars into the project for some of the additional public infrastructure behind the hook ramps, those are opportunities to kind of negotiate some of those points as well. If there's a concern that there should be a cap on the number of residential units, if that's what you're suggesting, I'm not sure if it is or not, but those are, I think for the deal to work, there could probably be only so much residential because it only generates a certain amount of certain types of tax revenues. So if we're trying to or tap into tax increment financing or sales tax increment financing, I think a certain portion of the site has to have those tax generating uses for the project to kind of make financial sense.
Thank you. Does any other commissioners have any more questions for staff? Okay, let's hear from the applicant. If you could come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Tyler Carlson, Evergreen Development, 1873 South Bel Air Street, Suite 1200, Denver. I'm the managing partner of Evergreen and thankful to be here tonight. Also want to thank Zach for a very thorough presentation. He covered a lot of ground, which will save me from having to cover it on my end. But to begin with, I thought we put together a fun little video just to wake everybody up, but also just to, I think, illustrate the vision and some of the big picture concepts with the planning effort. So I'm not sure if there's a way to turn off that first light right there so you can see. There we go, perfect, thank you very much. But I'll play this video and then I'll get into my formal presentation. Much. The Oscar nominations are coming up soon, so if anyone would like to put us for that, we'd appreciate that. You know, I think as a quick preface, you know, the what you have before you tonight from a zoning and design pattern book standpoint is the result of about a year and a half work. I'd say thousands of man hours, and hundreds of thousands of dollars for our company in an effort to transition this property from a vacant piece of land that's sat undeveloped for a variety of reasons for decades and create a long-term community asset for not only the city of Wheat Ridge, but also the greater Applewood area, most of which is not in the city. Right now, finding a place where the community can gather on the west side of town is hard to find. As much as I love the Applewood Center, it's not exactly a place you want to linger in the parking lot very long without risking your life. And with this property, we have a unique opportunity to create a mixed-use environment where development occurs that's not otherwise possible within the city. And part of that is because of the flexibility allowed in the zoning documents before you. So I think we all know where the property's at. Just to the quick history, we already gone over the Cabela's piece of it. It should be noted that a large reason why this property was not developed under the Cabela's reign was because of site infrastructure cost, and specifically because at the time the State Highway Department was requiring the construction of 2 different interchanges with the first building permit essentially on the site. The hook ramps that we're all very aware of, but also a brand new diamond interchange off of Highway 58. And the cost of those improvements ultimately led to the demise of the project in its first iteration. So what happened in the intervening years is the city of Wheat Ridge went proactively out between, I think, the years 2014 and 2016 and approached the state about phasing the improvements and allowing for a certain amount of development to occur within this area before the Highway 58 interchange would need to be constructed. That's been studied ad nauseum by the traffic engineers both at the city and the state and privately, and a phasing program has been approved. It's the intention of our project to construct essentially all the improvements required by CDOT south of Clear Creek, the actual creek, but to not construct the new interchange on Highway 58. However, that's not going away. It essentially just gets phased when future development occurs, primarily north of the creek on land that's owned by Coors at a later date. We became involved in the site. I actually checked my records in March of 2015. So nearly 3 years ago, we approached Cabela's about acquiring the property because they considered it excess real estate and no longer wanted it. We were under contract with them for over a year and a half, ended up acquiring their land at the end of 2016, along with about 30 acres from Jefferson County. It's the old animal control shelter that used to be there that the county no longer wanted. And so a good deal of the Wagon District, which is the open space district, came from the county, with a small portion, about 7 developable acres, that fell into in the Mill District, the employment area. So all of 2017 last year was working very intensely with staff to create what's before you tonight, the ODP, the design pattern book, the vision book, which we think lays a solid foundation for future development. We've had a number of community meetings. We had the one official one that was on Zach's report in December of 16, but we've had 3 subsequent community meetings plus leasing focus groups. We have Planning Commission tonight, and then our next stop on the train of process is the February 12th, second reading at City Council. Again, what we're trying to do here is reinvent what this property can be and make it more of a total mixed-use community, including retail, entertainment, restaurants, hospitality or hotels, multifamily and employment, and knitting all those uses together in a way that's synergistic and symbiotic. This is the way every master plan development is going in the country, and the proposal before you tonight is reflective of that trend of integrating uses and creating live, work, play, and stay environments. The other goal is to improve the connectivity of this project to the greater neighborhood. And that's in a couple of ways. One is through just outreach. I think we've been very intentional about trying to engage the neighborhood, go in neighbors' backyards, meet with them, respond to emails. I've personally responded to every email, or Christine has, that we've received. We take that very seriously. We realize that none of us personally live in this neighborhood. We live in Denver, but we don't live in this neighborhood. And the concerns that neighbors express are valid and reasonable, and we need to mitigate those concerns to the degree possible. We also wanted feedback from the neighbors on the tenancy and what specific uses and users are they looking for? What do they not already have in the neighborhood that they're looking to have in terms of shopping options, entertainment options, food options, and housing options. The other way we want to connect this more tightly and addressing some of your concerns, Commissioner Weaver, is through the physical interconnectivity. One is improving the circulation with the I-70 hook ramps. I've got a graphic we'll show that. That will dramatically improve the traffic flow on 32nd, significantly, because it's going to remove a whole traffic signal, allow the on and off ramp circulation of the highway to be much better. but also improving connectivity with the RTD bus system to bring it onto the west side of I-70. And really, especially improving the trail connectivity. Right now, it's like the Great Wall of China to get from the river to 32nd, and we're going to improve that significantly through both our on-street or adjacent to street trail system along Clear Creek Drive, but also doing a regional trail from the creek to the Applewood Golf Course and ultimately to the new recreational facility, whatever Prospect does there, which I think will be a dramatic improvement for the Applewood neighborhood that we're excited about. And then lastly, connecting it by creating special places that we're going to sustain and endure, throughout the evolution of retail. I've done retail for 15 years, and last year was the most revolutionary and upending year in retail in my career. E-commerce is completely redefining how goods and services are conducted in the United States, and it's having a dramatic impact on the physical built environment. And so things that we took for granted, even 3 years ago, are no longer for granted, and they are questioned. And the mixture of uses illustrates that. When Cabela's planned this project, they planned 1 million square feet of primarily retail. This was going to be another Denver West. Today, we've got, I bet you this may be at best 50% retail entertainment, with the other 25% being employment, the other 25% being residential, and hospitality. I mean, that's where the world's gone. But that also creates opportunities, because the retail that we are going to do, the food we are going to do, is going to be distilled down into highly concentrated and programmed spaces. And the example that was shown in the quick video clip is the Crossing. We've got a portion of planning area for the Vineyard District where can't remember my numbers, where we're going to create a plaza district that's going to have an modern agricultural theme, where people can gather, where there is no auto traffic blazing in front of buildings, there are no parking stalls in front of buildings, and where we can create a space where music can happen, where there's water fountains or fire pits. I've got a tractor slide that I've been dreaming of doing in a project for years. I grew up in Brighton, and we're going to put a tractor with a slide on it somehow or some way in this project, because it's a lifelong goal of mine. I already have my airplane wing slide ice cream kiosk coming to Stapleton with Little Man Ice Cream, and this is the kind of thing we want to do. But it's creating these spaces where parents feel safe bringing their kids, letting them run around and be crazy. I've got 4 kids, where they don't have to be worried about a car pulling in or out or a loading dock coming in. And the reality is in the vast majority of retail environments in West Denver, and specifically in Wheat Ridge, that's not possible. At best, you've got a 6 to 8 foot sidewalk between you and automobiles. That's not a place. That's not an opportunity to linger and share, an experience with neighbors. But what we're trying to do here is, create, environments within a broader project that have that sense of place where you feel safe, where you can linger, and it's really important to us. So another shot of that with some really great western views. So again, when you're planning a 100-acre project, you have to divide it into districts. I don't want to belabor this. We've already gone through it. We've got the Mill District, with employment, Homestead, which is intended to be residential, Vineyard, which is intended to be retail, food-oriented, and Harvest, which is intended to be more retail, entertainment-oriented. And the planning, these planning districts and the road grid were influenced by the site and some of its challenges. It has significant topography. It is our biggest challenge, because with topography, and these areas are highlighted in yellow, I think I'm colorblind, are retaining walls. It's how do you interface with the street grid? How do you create build twos to create a sense of place when you've got topography you're trying to manage? How do you address and take advantage of the asset that the Clear Creek presents, and orient planning areas 1 and 2 to leverage that asset? How do you take advantage of views of the mountains? How do we also dance around the fact that Denver Water right now is dropping a second 84-inch pipe that slashes right through the project that we can't build on top of? And then how do we be sensitive, as you raised, Councilman, to the neighbors who have lived there for years, who have overlooked fields and have got horses in the backs of their property, as Roxanne does. I know her. And how do you be sensitive to that? Because their life is going to be changed. There will be more light. There will be more noise. And how do you mitigate those impacts to the degree possible? And so, the street network and the placement of these planning areas is a result of us analyzing all of these site constraints that impact, how you can plan this property. And then once you do that, then we've got to interface in all the connectivity, and it's both vehicular circulation and it's pedestrian circulation. One thing to highlight on this slide is the dotted lines. There is the primary trail connection that goes along essentially the western boundary of the site and takes pedestrian and bike riders, or equestrian for that matter, if you want to get on a horse, from Clear Creek along the western edge of our site, where they will not have to cross streets, and be able to get from the Clear Creek to the Applewood Golf Course street crossingless. And that's really important, because if you've ever ridden a bike or have got kids on bikes, anytime you're interfacing and crossing a street, it's an opportunity for accidents, an opportunity for challenge, and we want to avoid that. We also have the challenge, uniquely, of being adjacent to the Coors water storage ponds. And as it turns out, they are very sensitive to their water because it ends up going into their distribution facilities, and there's regulatory issues associated with that. So we have to skirt kind of around the lakes versus try to plow right through them. But, secondary to that main trail connection is the smaller trail connections that are shown there, that are going to be both adjacent to the street, off the street, and preserving the existing trailhead and trail system that's right along I-70 along the Youngsville frontage road. So the net result of all of this interconnectivity planning is the fact that we will be adding a second trailhead. There's the current trailhead at Clear Creek at the frontage road by the old animal control facility. We'll be adding a second trailhead where the trail system on the kind of the northwest corner of the site interacts with the river, and that'll be another opportunity for engagement with the Clear Creek system, Clear Creek trail system. And then, one tricky thing we had to navigate is how you interface this pedestrian bike traffic with these new hook ramps. And so there's a little blow-up inset in the presentation. It's maybe hard to see at your scale, but we're having to dance around and make sure that people aren't crossing directly in front of that hook ramp stoplight, because we don't want people coming around the hook ramp at a unreasonably fast speed, hitting ice or something and running into pedestrians. So we're actually routing pedestrian traffic on the east side of Clear Creek Drive across to the west and then back over, because we wanted to avoid that pedestrian conflict. So all this being said, it's been very intentional and thoughtful about the interconnectivity between planning areas, and that's reflective in those white arrows, and also connecting the neighborhoods across the site to the creek, excuse me. So on the highway improvements specifically, I think this is a graphic that kind of talks through the sequencing of the construction of these ramp improvements that will start construction this spring. It's funded by the 2E bond initiative. The city has the money. We've got the plans nearly approved by CDOT. And the first thing that you'll see is the construction of the new, number one, new I-70 westbound off-ramp and the Clear Creek Drive extension. So what that means is there'll be a new off-ramp constructed there in yellow, and then Clear Creek Drive will be built between the new off-ramp and 32nd Avenue. Right now, it kind of terminates and turns by the La Quinta. There's a gap west of the La Quinta that's a field that's already right-of-way that's been acquired. That's where Clear Creek Drive will connect through there. So job number one is to build the new off-ramp. Once that is complete, number two is the existing 32nd Avenue off-ramp will be decommissioned and removed, and that you'll no longer be able to get off there. You'll get off at number one. Then the third thing, and this addresses your concern, Commissioner Dorsey, is number three, there'll be a new, what we call a flyover bridge. So the new on-ramp there at Clear Creek Drive will run parallel to I-70 but not merge. It will actually go over a new bridge across 32nd Avenue. It'll meet up with the existing 32nd Avenue westbound. They will pre-merge, and then they will downstream merge onto I-70. So that you'll basically have two ways to get onto I-70. They will both merge together, kind of by where the current 32nd Avenue on-ramp merges, and then they will then merge together. And then number 4 is that we will construct a new median in 32nd Avenue that will preclude you from going west on 32nd Avenue and turning left onto the on-ramp. You'll have to go right, by the gas station, go down Clear Creek Drive, and then loop up the number 3, ramp to kind of do it like a loop-de-loop. And the reason why that's important is that, all these specifically designed traffic engineering mechanisms were to reduce traffic impacts on 32nd Avenue and allow that bridge to flow better, that underpass, excuse me. So now the way that happens is stopping the westbound 32nd stack up, trying to get onto the highway and eliminating that entirely, providing a new 2 ways now to get onto westbound I-70. And then because everyone gets off on Clear Creek Drive now, what the hope is that will diffuse the traffic, because if you're going to the northeast, you'll actually take a right, go down the hill, go on 40th Avenue and be able to take the Youngfield frontage road and never actually have to go through the 32nd Avenue pinch point because of the 40th Avenue underpass. So it's a little bit hard I've been thinking about this for a year and a half, so it's easy for me to conceptualize it. If any of you have questions about that specifically, I'm happy to walk through that with you at a later time when we can sit down with plans and go over it. But the bottom line is that the circulation there will dramatically improve and take traffic off of 32nd Avenue. Back to the districts, I don't think we need to belabor it. We have cute names, we have cute pictures. The intent is we have real uses that address the needs of the region and the community going forward. The Mill District is focused on employment uses. It's where the highest intensity and heights are allowed in that district. Because we don't have a committed, anchor or employer user for this, Commissioner Ohm, we have asked for the broadest possible set of uses within reason, and we had a lot of discussions over the last year about what's reasonable to request in there, because we're looking at things, from R&D campuses to Amazon H2 to potential hospital uses to more traditional retail could still happen here. I don't think we're going to get Costco showing up and wanting to do another store, but that still is possible. Planning Area 1 is where Cabela's was originally going to locate. So it is a great retail site. The problem is because of Amazon, there are no anchor deals being done right now of any significance. So this planning area has 2 primary access points, a signal on 40th Avenue, which is shown there in the graphic, and then another full movement driveway that splits with the Homestead planning area on Clear Creek Drive. There are build-to requirements that vary depending upon the type of use. If it becomes more of an office employment type of campus, then there's one type of build-to, because those types of buildings you'll want to be centrally located in that 25 acres. If it's more retail, restaurant, or smaller format buildings, then the smaller office buildings can then go up against the street more easily. And so we try to be very careful about planning flexibility in this planning area. Because Zach went into the details, I won't go into the specificity of the standards. I think we're already covered there in the build-to requirements, but we can always circle back if you'd like. The Homestead District, again, is intended to be residential, medium to high density residential, most likely market rate apartments, for rents. And we've developed apartments for a long time now, and I've said this before in neighborhood meetings. If there was one project where I personally could rent an apartment, it would be in the northwest building that's next to the trailhead in this site, because that building is going to have amazing views of Table Mesa and the mountains. You're going to be on the creek. You're going to be on the trailhead. You're going to have the opportunity to walk a quarter mile down the street to, I think, some really amazing restaurants and amenities. And the land and your western views will be unimpeded because it's Coors water storage facilities. It is going to be a tremendous place to live and a great opportunity for someone who is looking for that type of lifestyle. Again, access will be off Clear Creek Drive, and interconnectivity with Planning Area 1 is really important. Again, I won't go through the details here, but we can circle back if you'd like. There we go. Vineyard, this is the heart of the project in terms of the placemaking, but because of the topography, it's kind of broken up, and that's why there's a planning area 3 versus a planning area 4. Planning area 4 sits high, as Commissioner, you mentioned. It sits basically directly north of La Quinta. It's where the homeless camp used to be. I met our friend there before we cut some of the trees down. And it's going to be very intense from a traffic standpoint because that's where the freeway traffic comes in and out. One thing that does impact planning area 4 is what's called an A line. CDOT has this magical line that you cannot cross with access, and it's basically a certain distance from highway interchange ramps, and so that impacts the access and the planning of planning areas 4. But it'll be a more traditional automotive highway type uses. But then planning area 3 steps down. That's where there's the significant fall off, and where we can use that topography to our advantage. And in the corner of planning area 3, and that point is where we anticipate doing the crossing, where we're going to create a placemaking environment. No developments allowed at the point by zoning, and that's where the plazas will be. It'll actually sit higher than Clear Creek and 40th Avenue at the intersections, will be elevated above the street traffic, which will be a really nice effect. We did something similar at the East Bridge project in Stapleton, where you sit a little bit higher, makes those patios a lot more accessible. And we've got restrictions specifically in planning area 3 about automotive type uses, because the intent is to have place and food and rooftop patios and fire pits and that type of environment. Then the Harvest District, which includes planning areas 5, 6, and 7. Planning areas 5 and 6 are in a hole, and I think one thing it's easy to get confused, just to the right of planning area 5, you can see another area of green. That is the lot that sits at grade with the homes. That is not owned by us. It's not in our project. It's owned by a different developer, actually the developer who did the La Quinta and the gas station and Good Times. So that sits high. And that's where I absolutely agree with you. If we were planning that area, 65 feet would not be permissible. Planning area 5 is the sled hill. It's the hole. It was going to be the back of house for Walmart, as you mentioned. Walmart was going to go on planning area 6, and planning area 5 was going to be basically the hole behind Walmart where the loading dock activity would be. So because 5 and 6 sit anywhere, depending upon 40 to 60 feet below the houses, we do believe there's an opportunity there for height. The intent is not to do height here. It's probably going to be single story structures. Our goal here is this is where the entertainment piece of the puzzle is. We've been approached by several niche movie theater concepts, dinner theater type of, not Boulder dinner theater, but like you can eat and watch a movie at the same time type concepts. We think that could be a really exciting use in this planning area. We've been approached by some more family entertainment type groups that do bowling and billiards, all indoor. So there's not going to be a go-kart track or anything, but indoor type entertainment uses. Uses I would say similar to if you're familiar with the Lone Tree Entertainment District that they've got down there, that's immediately south of the Park Meadows Mall, where they've got the indoor skydiving place and they've got the movie theater and the restaurant district. That's the type of uses that we see going in here, that will again be a entertainment anchor for the project. And then we'd also believe that in planning area 7 is where there's a great opportunity for a hotel site, because you will have across the street, catty corner, the kind of the food plaza district, the crossing. You'll have the entertainment, to the south. You'll have amazing views to the west across the lake, and you'll have across the ponds, and you'll have close proximity to the highway with great visibility. So we think planning area 7 is a really unique opportunity potentially for a hospitality user, and we're in conversations with several about the project. So, and the lastly, not last but definitely not least, is the Wagon District. Again, this area is being deed restricted to be only open space type uses. In terms of the private ownership, it will be owned by the Metropolitan District. This whole broader property has a district on it called the Longs Peak Metro District. It was created by Cabela's back in the day. It is currently managed by 2 companies, us and Coors, because some of the Coors land is in that Metro District. And the purpose of a Metro District like that is to own and operate long-term open space properties that cities or counties don't want to own. And so they will be the ones who are managing and maintaining, the water quality ponds. The trailhead will be in there. Then all the gold panning area that's really, close to the intersection of the two highways. Longs Peak Metro District will also be the financing vehicle for the public financing that does occur in the future that Ken referenced. But the financing picture right now is unclear because we don't have any committed anchors for the project. What we're trying to do is essentially set the table here with the zoning to then this year make those commitments with those anchor tenants to be able to then launch into construction and actual development. So the architecture, as I mentioned, because of the agricultural and mining heritage of Wheat Ridge and specifically the Clear Creek corridor, we very early decided to take in an architectural theme based upon what we're calling contemporary or modern agricultural type vernaculars with pitched roofs and color. It's one of my biggest pet peeves, is bland beige projects. If you want that, you can go to Highlands Ranch. No offense if you're from Highlands Ranch. But what we're trying to do here is create character and create visual interest. And agricultural rural America has color and has interest. It's not all taupe and beige and shades of brown. But the question is, how do you implement that in a modern structure? We're not going to build a bunch of barns. That's obviously impractical. And so we went on as a journey with staff to find examples of, we thought, architecture that was inspired by agricultural themes. It would be a good template for us to apply to this project. And that really is the intent of the ACC, is to make sure at the very front end that whoever the users are who come in, whether it's Starbucks or some multinational company who wants to put a corporate headquarters here, that they apply these design themes so there's some cohesion in terms of the architectural vernacular color material palette for the property. And so, there's a focus on, wood, on natural stones, on, cut stones, and color to try to tie and theme all this together from material palette. And this was, again, something we spent a lot of time, with city staff on. The other thing we spent time on is signage. Signage is one of the most under-leveraged assets in a project. If done right, it can make something, a fairly pedestrian project, look so much more interesting and attractive if you use it as an architectural and artistic feature versus just a bunch of a box with neon lights behind it that's got Johnny's Pizza across the front. That's very utilitarian. That's great for getting the message out, but it's not great for expressing architecture, for expressing brand, for expressing interest in the project. And so we took a very thoughtful approach to the signage package in here, not only allowing a lot of opportunities for signage, but allowing for creativity in the signage and theming of the project that will help it to be more attractive to users. And so if you get into the weeds of it, it allows for that. As an example, if you ever have a chance to go out to Stapleton, this Eastbridge Town Center project that we just recently opened, I think did a great job. We did a creative sign package under the City and County of Denver, and it's just an interesting approach to letting a tenant express who they are, but in a way that is attractive to neighbors. So very important. And then lastly, landscaping is going to be one last unifying approach to the project. Because of our level of detail right now, we don't have landscape plans for you to review. That will come at the SDP phase. But we've allowed for a plant palette and planning methodology that we think will allow us to use landscaping, signage, street furniture like trash cans and lighting and benches to unify this project so that when you drive into it, you immediately know you're at Clear Creek Crossing, and you know when you're leaving, and that becomes a familiarity that is attractive to the neighborhood long term. Because again, the goal here is to create a lifestyle. If you want to have an enduring project that's going to survive the Amazonation of everything that we do in our lives, you have to create an experience. And the goal behind this zoning is to allow us to create an experience to engage the community where you can live, work, play, dine, stay, exercise, socialize, and want to be there not just because you have to be there, because that's the closest place to pick up your dry cleaning. So with that, that's the conclusion of my formal presentation, but happy to answer any questions, and I thank you for your patience. That was a very long-winded presentation, but there's also a lot to talk about, so thank you.
No questions other than your presentation is great. Thank you.
Yes, hi. I do have a few questions. Could you describe the west side of I-70 as it runs along the east side of your property? What's your height difference there? I assume it's lower. How much lower? And are you going to fill that in to bring it up to any level?
Yeah, great question. So in the video, there was a little thing that gives me anxiety every time I see it, but it says, bringing in, 500,000 cubic yards of soil. Which is a lot, and each yard is not cheap, I will tell you. Because this site was long time ago used as a mining site, it was mined for gravel years ago by Coors, it is not at grade. A lot of it sits below the highway. And so we will be bringing in a fair amount of fill to level that off. You've already seen some of that because we've had some import occur. But the goal is to bring, most of the Mill District, Planning Area 1, once we fill it, will be not the same level as the highway, but it will be brought up a fair amount. Right now, it's a bowl. So a lot of fill will be brought into Planning Area 1 and 2 to basically bring them up so they are not in a hole. The other planning area where we're bringing a lot of dirt is that Harvest Commercial District, because it also sits in a hole. And one of the challenges with attracting, whether it's a movie theater or an entertainment complex, is everyone wants to be seen. It doesn't good to have a building that sits in a pit. And so the dirt work will really be brought in for planning area 1, 2, and 6 to elevate those a little bit, but they'll still be 40, 50 feet below the Applewood neighborhood. But it's interesting, as you take I-70, it climbs. So the beginning of planning area 1 is essentially kind of at eye level, but as you drive west on I-70, which is south, because just to make it easy, you climb, and as you hit the 40th Avenue bridge, that's going underneath, and you're at a pretty significant elevation difference. So we do need to elevate as well planning area 3 to try to let some of those users be visible. But that's part of the reason why we're also asking for some fairly significant highway signage. If you look in the sign package, there are 2 large monument or pylon monument signs that are in there to give exposure, especially those users in planning area 6, to the I-70 traffic. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but what you really need is a grading plan. I don't have a grading plan in my presentation today, but if you want to know the specifics of it, I've got our engineer here, and we could ask him up if you want to know exactly what those deltas are. Because did you bring, Jeff, your grading plan? Would you like Jeff to come up?
No, I surely don't need specifics on that, but if you could just give me an idea, are we talking the fill that you would bring would be 20 feet lower than the highway, 40 feet lower?
That's a good question. So planning area 1 is basically, it goes from par, from equal to the highway to, Jeff, what do you guess, about 10, 15 feet below the highway? 15 feet. Then you get to planning area 3, this is going to sit about 20 feet below the highway, 20 to 30. And then there's going to be there's kind of a big retaining wall between planning area 3 and 4, because 4 is going to be on each side of that hook ramp, and 4 will sit at the highway level again. So you've got basically planning area 3 is depressed about 20, 25 feet below. I'm guessing, if you want to correct me, yell at me, Jeff, if I'm wrong. And then the south end of planning area 1 is also below grade. And it's not that they're that much, they're different, but it's that the highway's climbing, as it goes south.
And so to that answer, the PA1, there seem to be up to maybe 7 that I've identified that if we go with the height, PA1, 2, and 3, we're up to 90 feet allowable.
Yeah, Or like an employment type of user.
Well, that's 9 stories, right,
No,
roughly?
it's more like 6 stories because,
Okay.
commercial stories are not 10, in the house it would be.
Okay.
But yeah, because commercial stories are, their clear heights are more like 15 feet, sometimes 20
okay.
feet for your ground level.
Okay.
So it ends up being about a 6-story building. And the reason for that 90-foot height is we did a survey of employment users and concepts. And, this is not going to be downtown Denver, but what height do we need to be able to attract an office campus type user? And the feedback that we received is you need to be able to accommodate at least a 5 to 6 story type of building to give someone enough critical mass for a campus. Because this is not like Inverness or Interlaken where we can kind of spread things out. If we were out in the suburbs where we had more land, you could, all those office campuses, and those regional parks are more spread out. Here we've got a fairly defined area. And so in a more urban context, the feedback we received is you got to be able to see 5 or 6 stories commercially, or else it's not going to happen.
So then that would be a visual on the freeway coming
Absolutely.
southbound of 4 stories to above the,
Correct. Yeah. So that's
Visual.
gonna be as you come around I-70 going westbound, that'll be the first thing you see is that Mill Commercial District, and that's why Cabela's was going to put their building there. That's the most visible part of the project right there. Exactly.
to me, that speaks of less of a vision of the mountains from
the highway.
from the highway, as well as people to the east of the highway that now have to look at 4-story, 5-story building,
You're correct.
taking out their view that they've been used to for a while.
Yeah.
And then what kind of lighting would that building have that would be on during all the time? Well, nighttime, I guess.
Sure.
What kind of lighting would those buildings in that 1, 3,
Planning
and
area 1.
yeah, what would those entail as far as, I'm sure when you come around the corner on I-70, you can't have a light blinding you, so you've taken that into consideration, but just overall with the visual on lighting.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, all the parking lot lighting, there's pretty strict standards that are in the design pattern book that we finalize with staff that will require, downward lit, LED, low profile type light fixtures. And commercial parking lots, as you know, they're on all night for liability reasons, just like, the Applewood Shopping Center across the way. The signage, the lighting here, because it'll be new and modern, will be much less light intrusive than the Applewood Shopping Center. But, there will be some light impact from that. But to be honest with you, because of the amount of light that I-70 already generates and the Applewood Shopping Center generates, it won't be, frankly, any different. In terms of the buildings, if the Mill District ends up being that multi-story employment office type building, it'll have, windows just like every office building. Most offices, they are 9 to 5 type operations, so they darken out the lights at night after the janitors go away. But that's really to be determined because, again, we don't have, a firm idea right now as to the specific user who will go in planning area 1.
And then the, the signage that would be on those buildings view, are they going to be large? I'm not looking at the specific signage allowed. Are they going to be large size and well-lit and constantly on?
Great question. So the signage allowed is based upon, I think, the building frontage, if I'm not, Zach, tell me if I'm inaccurate. So it depends on how much frontage that building has on I-70, and that will dictate the size of the signs. But yeah, I think, will the users, all those users are going to want their signs on, whether they're retail or if it is some employer who wants a sign on there for their logo, they'll want them on because, they're paying and they're locating to be here primarily because of I-70. And so, yeah, it will have an impact. The good news for us is immediately across the highway is all commercial. That's where there's a shopping center, that's where there's the church, that's where there's the outdoor, the RV, sales facility. So we're actually fortunate in that regard. Western views are a big issue, as you guys know, intimately in Colorado, but our proximate neighbors are not residences, thankfully. But people who live behind there, it'll have an impact. And for people who drive the highway, they'll see it. But actually, we're glad they'll see it. That's the whole point, is to get people to see it and come in.
The last one in regards to that I think I have right now is possibilities of about up to 7 that I can count on the use allowed might be 24/7 operations. That seems to create a whole nother area of concern with traffic and people and noise and that sort of thing, that maybe since you have commercial to the east, you're not so concerned about. But if you have a residential building that's directly west of where that 24/7 could possibly be, even including some of the grocery, car washes, it depends on whether they're allowed to be 24/7 or not. But if you do have something like a hospital, you're going to be 24/7 with your traffic and your sirens and your coming and going. How do you feel about that in regards to this PA1?
PA1, yeah. So I think across the site, whenever you have a highway-oriented site with an interchange on it, there's going to be 24-hour uses, whether that's a 24-hour gas station or 24-hour restaurant. Someone wants their Taco Bell at 3 in the morning. I mean, whatever. That's because people use the highway 24 hours a day. So I think there will be, by virtue of its highway interchange, some 24-hour uses. There are other uses that are 24-hour, just not because of the highway, but because of the type of product they're serving. So we have had interest from a couple of specialty grocery stores for the site. Grocery stores, a lot of them want to be open 24 hours a day because, if you need diapers, at 3 in the morning, you need a place to go, and they find that's a service they want to offer. So, I think we've been very open and candid with the Applewood neighborhood, especially that this project is going to impact your life, and there's going to be some things that you're going to wake up in 5 years and love about it because it's closer and you can walk there, and there's this new restaurant you love, or there's a place you can take your aunt when she's in town. But there's going to be stuff that you hate, because what has been field and dirt is going to be, more light in cars and things like that. And that's just the nature of development. What I will tell you, from at least a traffic engineering standpoint, is what we are proposing today has significantly less peak hour traffic than what was proposed previously with Cabela's and Walmart. And that's because of the mixture of uses that flow traffic at different times of day, and they're less intense traffic uses. If this was another Denver West, that's why Denver West is a bloody mess, because of all the traffic coming in and out there on the weekends. But this will be different because it's, half of this is non-retail services. So I think what we're trying to do, and we've met with and spent time in their backyards with most of the immediately adjacent neighbors, is we're going to be very thoughtful with the landscaping and the fencing and things like that along their adjacencies, because while we can't eliminate our project, what we can do is to make sure that those transitions between uses is done as thoughtfully as possible, and can mitigate the light, the noise, with especially landscaping, mature landscaping, to the best degree.
Now, one last one then. Applewood Golf Course, I lost track of that. Was that going to be a housing development?
No.
No?
It was proposed to be a housing development. That caused the Applewood neighborhood some consternation, as you can imagine. And so what ended up happening is that proposal went away. Coors, who owned the golf course, ended up selling it to the Prospect Parks and Recreation District. They went through a tax increase and were able to get funding from GOCO and Jefferson County, and they acquired the golf course. For the immediate future, it's going to be a golf course, but the plan is to, I think, transition to other types of recreational uses, but it won't be developed and what we have committed to do is provide an easement and a trail network to connect to that golf course facility. They already secured an easement from Coors. There's that pond that's shown on this aerial. So there's that the dog leg by itself, the panhandle that next to the homes is an easement that's already been dedicated by Coors, and then the rest of that is our property that we'll be connecting to.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Commissioner Leo? Commissioner Weaver?
thank you.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners, appreciate it.
Okay, I will now open up the citizens forum. Are there any citizens that have signed up to speak? I'll start with this list. And this was not a, sometimes people use this as a sign-up sheet. So just let me know if you had intended to speak or not. I'll start with the first one. Sarah Ellis? If you want to speak, please come to the podium and state your name and address. I'd like to defer my time to Mr. Max. You cannot defer your time, madam. No, I will give everybody at least 3 minutes. Numi Hirsch. I will decline as well, thank you. Okay. Max Stitch. Please come to the podium, state your name and address.
Good evening. My name is Max Stitch, S-T-I-C-H. I'm legal counsel for Lutheran Medical Center, located at 8300 West 38th Avenue. I have just a few points that I'd like to make to the commission that relate primarily to the criteria of whether the changes that in the zoning promote the health and safety and welfare of the community. The first point, and I believe that Commissioner Voss brought up, and that was the change in uses, and that Chairman Ohm brought up, and that is the additional uses that have been brought up. And in particular, on Lot 1, PA1, and in particular with a hospital use. These uses were not in the original packet that were submitted to the neighborhoods. So we got, I forgot his name, but when the gentleman first spoke, he said that there was no neighborhood opposition. And that's because when the neighborhoods were first informed of this project, they were not informed that a hospital use would be on or potentially be on Planning Area 1. Now, the municipal code 26109 is specifically designed to give an adequate opportunity for the applicants and the residents to give their objections or give their support. Well, here the neighbors were never informed because it was changed after the fact that a hospital could possibly be on this site. Now, these neighbors should have known this because we talked about parking, not parking, we talked about the roads, you talked about the entryways. I mean, with respect to a hospital, you have ambulances. You have ambulances screaming through roads. You potentially have helicopters landing on the top of hospitals. The neighborhood didn't know about this. The neighborhood never had the opportunity to voice their objections if possible. So just with that one point said, what we would recommend is that the neighborhood have the opportunity to know the changes that Chairman Ohm brought up and have the opportunity to object. The next issue I want to bring up, since I only have 3 minutes, is the floodplain. A portion of this property is located within the 100-year floodplain, and that is the special flood hazard area defined by section 26804. Now, under your code, you cannot build a hospital in this area. Now, this is just a portion of Lot 1, and I should be clear, all the discussion I'm going to have is on Lot 1, and it's all going to be related to a hospital use. You cannot build a hospital in this SFHA. Now, again, not the entire parcel, but a portion of it is in that. The entire parcel is within the 500-year floodplain. And FEMA has special regulations for the 500-year floodplain. And the Colorado, and I want to make sure that I cite it correctly, the Department of Natural Resources, Colorado Water Conservation Board, created rules and regulations that they adopted in 2010, and they affect the minimum standards that communities are supposed to effectuate when properties are within floodplains. Now, the regulations state that communities are encouraged, they're not required, but they're encouraged to regulate critical facilities such as a hospital within the 500-year floodplain. It says you should not have hospitals within this floodplain. Again, it's not mandatory, but it's strongly encouraged. So the question then is if this commission is going to allow this, this proposed change to go forward as written, where a hospital is a permitted use, how does that, which is discouraged by FEMA and which is discouraged by the state, how does that promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the community? Another point I wanted to make, and I'm going through this fast since I only have a few seconds, and that's something that you brought up, Chairman Ohm, and that is this extremely broad uses. The design guidelines submitted have a tremendous amount of uses that go outside of the scope. And I think that, and I understand why the developer would want to do that. I get it. They want to be able to sell to as many possible people as humanly possible. But here, in particular, the hospital use has to be looked at critically for all of the reasons that I've stated. I mean, you've got traffic issues, you've got lighting issues, you brought lighting up, you're going to have emergency department lights, potentially helicopters landing on tops of roofs, and the residents in this area were never provided with the opportunity to object specifically to that use, because after the neighborhood meetings is when the use schedule changed. So, in going to traffic, I don't know how much time I have left.
You're over a little bit. I'll give you a
I'm
little.
over. Well, then I will wrap up.
Okay.
I mean, the suggestion that I would make on behalf of my client is that you either should reject the use of a hospital on PA1, or this matter should be stayed for a period of time so that the community knows and has the opportunity to fully assess what is being asked for and have the opportunity to object or to support the proposed change in use.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Chair, I just have one brief question for Mr. Stitch. I just want to clarify, are you speaking here on behalf of Lutheran or as a private citizen?
On behalf of, I'm legal counsel for Lutheran Medical.
I got that. I just wanted to
No,
clarify that.
I'm speaking
Okay.
as an attorney on behalf of Lutheran Medical.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that.
Any other questions?
If the hospital is not allowed in the 100-year floodplain, which is a portion of that property or that area, one, and the other part of that area is 500-year, not recommended to have a hospital. Why don't we just scratch the hospital thing altogether? Because you can't build it in the 100-year plain, period, end of story. And the other one is a recommendation not to. It should probably just be scratched off of the thing and not even considered.
Before we get into discussion, I would like to hear all the public testimony first.
Okay.
Thank you.
So you don't want me to answer that question?
No, I do not, sir.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, but I understand. Any other questions, or should I take my seat?
Please take your seats
Thank
here. Okay, Andrea Birch. Okay. Joe Grunwald. Is there a Chris Grunwald? Okay. Christine McWright. Ania Kuboto. Coral Salzman. Please state your name and address.
Yeah, Carol Salzman, Salzmann, 8300 West 38th Avenue. And thank you for allowing me this time to share a few thoughts tonight. I'm appearing tonight asking you to consider helping us delay a decision tonight on the Clear Creek Crossing, and I'll tell you a little bit more why. So I'm a long-term former Wheat Ridge, so I lived in Wheat Ridge almost 28 years. I still have a lot of friends that live in Wheat Ridge, and I'm also the Vice President for Community and Government Affairs at Lutheran Medical Center. Lutheran was just notified very recently, in fact, just 2 weeks ago, that a hospital was a possible conditional move to permitted use on this property. As the largest employer in Wheat Ridge, we've not had the opportunity yet to figure out what kind of impact this could have on our hospital, on our employees, and on our community partners. Like I said, we are strongly in support of redevelopment in Wheat Ridge, and we have been. In fact, I was on the 2005 Comprehensive Planning Committee at the time. So we believe in economic development in Wheat Ridge. What we're concerned about is that we'd like a little more time, like you, based on the questions that you've raised tonight, a little more time to review and really assess the kind of impact this could have, like I said, on your largest employer in Wheat Ridge. I want to thank you for the opportunity. Again, we're asking you to postpone a vote tonight and strongly consider that for reasons that each of you have brought up about this property. Anything from light to noise to concern, and particularly on that hospital zoning. That's probably our greatest concern on this particular proposal. I love the rest of the proposal. It looks fantastic, and it would be welcomed in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce Waring.
Yeah, my name is Bruce Waring, W-A-R-I-N-G, 3370 Oak Street. I'm a 30-year Wheat Ridge resident, and I'm speaking as a private citizen. First of all, I very much appreciate the opportunity to have an opportunity to talk with the commissioners, and I would also applaud the Evergreen Group's wonderful presentation on development of this site. I think overall, this is a wonderful contribution to our community, and although the Cabela's retirement plan as a greeter didn't work out for me, I applaud the prospects. But I would just emphasize some of the concerns that were raised by Mr. Ohm and Mr. Dorsey and Ms. Voss about the broad aspect of the change in zoning that really may have some unintended consequences, not only for this site, but for the rest of our community. And that I would also emphasize the points that were brought up by our Lutheran colleagues, just from a standpoint of duplication of existing services. We have a hospital that's 2 miles away. We have a hospital that's 3 miles away. And it's additional services that really, I'm not sure that our community really needs. But I think the points that were brought up do warrant some consideration, and whether or not there's a delay in approval so that that can be worked out, or I would agree wholeheartedly with with Commissioner Dorsey's comments about the possible way to deal with this, which would be to eliminate that proposal in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Waring. Okay. Edna Miklos. No. Okay, is there anybody else that has not spoken from the audience that would like to do so now? First, I want to take the public's testimony, and then, yes, you will get a chance to respond to some of the comments. Is there anybody else from the audience that wants to speak? Okay, I will close the citizens forum, and then let's go through, if you want to go first, sir, and maybe answer some of those questions or comments, and we can also have staff. Some were about the floodplain.
Yeah, the hospital use specifically.
Hospital use specifically, yes.
Sure. So when we closed escrow on the property, December of 2016, and made our first application, it is, I don't know, to be honest with you, recall. I have to go back and ask Zach and Ken if the first submittal had a P for permitted for the hospital use. I honestly don't remember. At that time, our main anchor for the project was Walmart. I think it was no secret, and that also created a bunch of consternation from neighbors and people uncomfortable with Walmart. It seems like there's always something to complain about with this project. And Walmart was intended to be our anchor tenant, and I think is also fairly public knowledge that in June of last year, Walmart pulled out. That was, from a development standpoint, fairly catastrophic. Because there are tens of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure that are required to construct this project, and without an anchor of some form or fashion, this project doesn't get built. We can zone it for a lot of pretty pictures and a lot of wonderful things, but it takes an anchor tenant or anchor user to finance and to drive a project like this. And so what we spent most of the summer and the fall of last year doing was casting about for potential alternate anchor users. Since this project was initially concepted to be anchored by retail, we talked to, and previously talked to, every national retail tenant known to man that could potentially breathe interest on this site. And there was zero, not a single large format anchor to replace the Walmart loss. So we also concurrently spent a lot of time in the employment sector, talking to employer brokers, employment developers. What are the types of uses that are appropriate for a highway site like this that could help lift a project of this scale? And we were also approached by several healthcare systems interested in this site, which led us to the conclusion that as a potential use, Planning Area 1 should allow for a potential hospital, because there's a very short list of users that can lift a project, or use categories that can lift a project like this. And it's no secret what hospital uses have done to regional centers like this. If you look at what Skyridge Hospital did to the Lone Tree Entertainment District, that was the first thing that happened, not Entertainment District, but what happened in Lone Tree, the first thing that happened down there. And followed that were Charles Schwab, Target, housing, other office space, multifamily, was catalyzed by this project. St. Anthony North on 144th, first thing to happen opposite the mall. Since St. Anthony North has come in, there's an adjacent retail project. Cabela's came in across the highway. Amazon's distribution centers happening, part of the catalyst for that project. And so we firmly believe that having a hospital use potential for this site makes a lot of sense. It makes sense from a planning perspective, and it makes sense from an economic perspective. And actually, we would welcome Lutheran to be part of the project. I think, for all the talk of ambulances and helicopters, Lutheran is surrounded by single-family residential homes today. And those homes deal with firsthand the impact of a hospital. This site is frankly a more appropriate location for a hospital because it does not have single-family homes immediately adjacent. So I think this is an excellent opportunity for it. I know it's a critical part of the zoning package because we think it is potentially the highest and best use for this site. I will also tell you that all the traffic analysis, all the noise analysis, all of the light analysis has all contemplated the potential for a hospital use here. That's all been baked in. This is not a surprise. This has not just happened 2 weeks ago. I'm sorry that the Lutheran folks didn't know about it, but everything we've submitted has had a P for the hospital use. for many, many months now. It's all been open to public records. We haven't put forward a hospital because I don't have a hospital proposal for you today, an SDP. But this is not a surprise to the development team. These hearings tonight are the public forum to provide comment. That's why we have it. We don't have 50 neighborhood meetings every time we change the specification in the design pattern book. That's not the point of neighborhood meetings. And so I think it would be, it is our intention to move this forward to council. And at the end of the day, in my experience with planning commissions are supposed to decide, is this good planning? I think this is good planning. It's city council's role to decide, are the uses compatible with overall city goals? That's city council's role. I would hope that you guys would agree tonight that this is a good planning exercise, that all the uses contemplated are appropriate given this is a highway to highway site. The other highway to highway sites, are C470 and I-25. It's the Park Meadows Mall. That's the type of intensity we're talking about. This is not 38th and Wadsworth. This is a totally different animal, and it requires a totally different set of uses. So anyways, that's a very long response, but I am fairly defensive of the transparency that we've gone through and the thoughtfulness of the analysis. As it relates to floodplain, Planning Area 1 is not in the 100-year floodplain. That was an incorrect statement, and my engineers are here to speak to that. Part of Planning Area 1 is today in the 500-year floodplain. If a hospital use were to come here, whether it's Lutheran or somebody else, it will be up to them to decide in their grading plans if they want to elevate the site out of the 500-year floodplain and comply with those recommendations of the state that are, again, recommendations, not requirements. But we're not here to approve a grading plan today. We're here to approve uses. If a hospital of whoever it is comes forward on Planning Area 1, it'll be your role as a planning commission to determine if the grading and the parking lots and everything else addresses some of the concerns that the gentleman previously came up with. But all the ambulance traffic has been planned. I'm pretty certain there's not a heliport allowed in the use set, so I don't think you need to worry about that. But that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Should we hear from the engineer?
Actually, I was curious. Zach, was there a slide in your presentation that showed where that floodplain was on the site plan?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I just have it on ours, actually.
I thought I saw it, so I just wanted to briefly glance at that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's the blue dotted line. So the wagon district is a lot of it's in the 100-year floodplain. So to say, I guess, does it touch Planning Area 1? Yes, it touches a couple of feet of Planning Area 1, kind of right where it says site view from I-70. But it's the 100-year floodplain is almost entirely contained within the wagon district.
Any other questions? Okay. I would entertain a motion. Well, yeah, we will do the discussion typically after we get the second, and then we can have a discussion about any additional conditions, clarifications from staff on any conditions.
I'd like to make a motion on WZ 1607 Clear Creek Crossing by name and case number, that this decision be delayed for 2 reasons. The use schedule hasn't been publicized to the neighborhood in a neighborhood meeting, to my knowledge, and that 24-hour facilities, 24/7-hour facilities not be in the use.
So this is a motion for continuance.
What now?
Is this a motion for continuance?
It sounds like it.
Okay, is there a second? If there's not a second, then the motion will fail. Correct? If there's not a second, then the motion will fail. If there's not,
Yes, and I'd like to be given an opportunity to speak to the process at some point.
for what she was asking about is, yes, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of, I think Mr. Carlson spoke to this as well, but the neighborhood meeting occurred either in late November or early December of 16. And the purpose of the neighborhood meeting is to really, gather a fairly broad noticing of 600 feet of the surrounding properties and let them know that an application is going to be or may be submitted, right? So it's a required first step in the process. An application was subsequently submitted, so it's very high level in the level of information that's presented. It's an opportunity to engage the neighborhood and let them know if this causes you concern or interest, please stay tuned and keep in touch with the city planning office because an application may be submitted. An application was submitted later in December of 2016. And from the initial submittal on the ODP documents, it did include a hospital as a potential permitted use, not conditional, a permitted use. So Mr. Carlson is correct. I mean, I think this is the public engagement process, right? We're entering the public hearing process right now, and there was an additional noticing requirement for that. And so it's kind of the obligation of people that are interested to look for those public hearing notices and attend the public hearing, and as obviously some have, and we're glad to see them here. But this public hearing and then the city council public hearing are the formal opportunities for the public to come and express their concerns, support, whatever those opinions might be as they're doing, and that's great. But I just wanted to clarify that there was no improper disclosure of when hospitals were potential permitted use in Planning Area 1.
Thank you. Okay, I would entertain another motion, as we didn't have a second on that.
I'll make a motion. I move to recommend approval of case number WZ-16-07, a request for approval of a zone change from planned commercial development to planned mixed-use development for property located west of Interstate 70 between Clear Creek and 34th Avenue, approximately for the following reasons. 1, the proposed zone change will promote the public health, safety, or welfare of the community and does not result in an adverse effect on the surrounding area. 2, the proposed zone change is consistent with the goals and objectives of the city's comprehensive plan, which calls for a regional commercial center on the site. 3, the proposed rezoning is necessary in order to provide for a community need that was not anticipated at the time of adoption of the city's comprehensive plan, namely a more diverse mix of uses, which responds to market demands, mitigates transportation impacts, and yields a more robust development. 4, the proposed zoning includes a circulation network that supports the city's goals related to bicycle and pedestrian connectivity. 5, the proposed zoning establishes enhanced design controls related to site design, building design, materials, and landscaping that will result in a high-quality development. And 6, the criteria used to evaluate a zone change support the request, with the following condition: there be an addition of maximum residential height of 65 feet in area PA1.
Would you be amenable to adding 1 to 2 more conditions?
Well, it depends on what they are, I guess.
It has to be seconded first.
Oh, his has to be seconded first?
Doesn't
No, I
have to be
think,
seconded first before
Okay.
we do a friendly
yeah,
amendment.
second.
I will second that.
All right.
The first condition I would like to add is that at least 50% of the proposed total square footage at the ground floor shall contain non-residential uses.
Non-residential?
Non-residential uses.
In which area? All of them?
Just all of them, yeah. And it sounded by the presentation tonight that 50% was going to be retail, 25% was going to be employment, and then 25% residential. And so this is only affects, and this is something that comes out of the mixed-use development of the staff wrote specifically for mixed-use development.
Yeah, I'd accept that condition.
Okay. And then you need to second that condition.
Only if you want to.
Yeah.
Second that.
And then the next condition would be up for discussion. there are some members that spoke tonight that were not in favor at all of the hospital use. The applicant wants the hospital use. I would propose simply changing the hospital use to a conditional instead of permitted use, as we, the Planning Commission, are a recommending body. And that'll still have a chance to go before City Council, but we would basically be making a recommendation instead of permitted use, it'd be a conditional use. And then City Council would have to also approve that as well.
Would they have to produce, since we're the deciding body on an SDP though, wouldn't the conditional use approval end with us? Is that?
Conditional use is actually an administrative approval.
Okay.
So what do you, let's discuss that.
Yeah, I think we should discuss it.
What do you mean by conditional?
Well, right now it's a permitted use. We would change it to a conditional use. And that's what typical mixed-use development has for hospitals, is conditional, not permitted.
Maybe we should ask staff what the conditions, what the conditional parameters would be on approving or not approving a hospital as a use. What sort of parameters do you have for making that determination administratively?
Well, there's some criteria for review. The conditional use actually in general in the municipal code is only contemplated in the mixed use districts, and as it was correctly noted here, that's an administrative process, so it's really just a discussion with the applicant on how you might fine tune the site plan to make that conditional use appropriate on that particular piece of property. I'm certainly not going to tell the commission that you can't make this recommendation. I would suggest, though, that making a use not use by right for a 25-acre piece of property that's kind of integral to the development will be extremely challenging for the developer to be able to market that property realistically with end users, knowing that that's on some level the use itself is completely discretionary. As used in the mixed-use commercial zone district, it's really a matter of saying these uses might have different kind of vehicular impacts, but to suggest that hospitals as themselves kind of may or may not be allowed is just going to be a really challenging path moving forward for the applicant and for staff. I mean, to advise a major medical user of whether or not they're going to build a $500 million hospital, I mean, they're just not going to take that risk knowing that that's completely discretionary when they get in front of the Planning Commission. Mm-hmm. So I understand the concern. I just, as a practical solution, it's something that is worthy of a lot more discussion.
As long as we're discussing this, my 2 cents here on the hospital issue is looking at it from a floodplain standpoint, it would be really easy to make sure that the grade of a hospital wouldn't get anywhere near a 100-foot floodplain, considering that it's already, for all intents and purposes, out of there. My other point would be, it would be more up to the market to decide whether or not Wheat Ridge needs another hospital. I mean, we have Kaiser down the road, we have St. Anthony to the south, we have Lutheran, here in town. Maybe the market will support another one. Maybe Lutheran will need to expand. I don't know, but I think our purpose here is to look at what would be appropriate use from a planning perspective on the site, and I don't see how hospital use would be excluded from that.
Well, and they are going to be adding a significant amount of fill, so
yeah,
if there were some flooding issues, I would assume that would.
Well, yeah, even if you've seen down there already that just the fill they're kind of banking there, you can see what a difference it makes just adding, 5-10 feet of it in terms of potential floodplain. So my 2 cents is I don't see the need to add that as another condition on that motion.
Okay. The rest of you agree? Okay, so I think at this point, is there any more discussion? Yes.
Yeah, well, I understand the concerns. I think that is more of a use issue, and I'm trying to stay focused on the zone change and deal with the use issue as we go forward.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Mr.
Oh.
Mr. Chair, I apologize for interrupting, but I didn't entirely get your first condition, number one, and number two, it certainly would be customary to ask the applicant's opinion of a condition on a rezoning application. On some level, our city attorney would advise that there's a right for kind of a up or down vote on the application as submitted. So this is a fairly substantive condition, but if you wouldn't mind reading that again, just so I'm sure I've got it right, so I understand it.
Yes, the condition is at least 50% of the proposed total square footage at the ground floor level shall contain non-residential uses.
Got it.
And from my understanding, it was going to be 50% retail, commercial, 25% employment, and 25% residential, so that I didn't see an issue with that.
Great, thank you.
It was really just kind of codifying what had already been discussed, is my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, across the whole project. Sorry, I didn't.
Correct.
Okay.
And this is from section 26-1112, 1112, under B, mixed use.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry, I thought you were just talking about specifically where residential use was going, and I was getting thrown off. I'm on the same page now. Sorry.
Yeah, I think my intent is I'm in favor of the project. I definitely would like to see, this is one of the few areas that are open, and that was passed with the exemption of heightened density, and I definitely would like to see some heightened density in this area for the city.
Got it. And then just if you do want to give the applicant an opportunity to opine on that as well, just so you.
Yeah, if the applicant would like to respond to that condition.
Chairman, I think in principle, I don't have a problem with the 50% requirement. My concern is just from a phasing standpoint, because depending upon what builds when, if, for example, the multifamily were to be the first thing just from a construction timing standpoint that goes in, I can't have a multifamily project kind of on hold while we're waiting for the theater to build to get enough GLA so that they're not 50%. That's my concern. Because the timing of how it could impact the project could be fairly problematic. So I don't know if there's another way, Ken or Zach, to maybe address this. I think the intention is we're not going to have more than half the site be residential. That's not a problem and not uncontroversial for me.
Right.
And my only just concern is how do we work it out if there's the development timing standpoint and the residential goes first. Then it gets awkward, because then we've got different buildings waiting for other buildings to open, and we got this magic number we're solving for. And so is there a better way to address this concern? Because in principle, we're not going to build more than half the site as residential from a ground floor standpoint.
Yeah, no, I understand the concern. I think we can work out a way to kind of work through that administratively in terms of how we handle that phasing issue. So we can kind of work, if the Planning Commission passes that condition, I think we can work together to figure out how to implement that in a reasonable fashion.
Okay. I mean, an idea is maybe there's a condition of approval that recommends that the intent of the planning exercise is that no more than half of the site is going to be residential, and that as the Architectural Control Committee and as staff works through this, we're keeping that in mind. If we come in next month with an application for 75% of this to be residential, that's contrary to the intention of the project. I don't know if there's a way to do that to give you more confidence, Chairman, but
I'm not sure that I want to change my condition, but I understand. This says that it's the proposed total square footage at the ground floor level. So my understanding is you could have retail at the ground floor and you could have residential on top of that. And because your height and density is exempted out of the charter, you could have residential on top of, it's a mixed use. You could have, would that be correct?
Yeah, you definitely could.
So it's not a total residential, it's just at the ground floor level.
Yeah, no, I get it. The challenge is we've built thousands of apartment units, our team has, and based upon the type of buildings that we anticipate being here, and especially where planning area 2 is at on the site, it's not going to be a ground floor retail site there. It's going to be 100% multifamily buildings, because there'll be some bike traffic on the trail, but there won't be traffic to activate that in that planning area. And we specifically do not allow residential in planning area 3 because we want it to be more sales tax, retail driven, restaurant driven.
I think my intent was not necessarily on a per planning area necessarily. It was for the entire site. That was really my intent, was that I just don't want to see 50% of the entire site residential. That it needs to be, this was always intended as a regional employment center, mixed-use commercial. I'm all for the mixed use, the residential, the commercial, the employment. I just want to make a condition that only a maximum of 50%, and this is based off of the city's mixed-use development code, is what they said is the ground floor retail. So for the entire site, that 50%, and what you said is that for the entire site, it's only be 25%
Yeah, and maybe instead of ground floor building square footage, which gets into this building construction timing question, maybe it's acreage of land with an SDP approval for residential. Again, if the developable acreage here, Commissioner, is around 70, probably around 80 acres. So basically you can't come in with more than 40 acres of residential SDPs. And I think maybe that's a better way to do it, because then we're not worrying about construction building.
And I think that's exactly my point, Mr. Carlson, is I think between you and I and the rest of the team, we can figure out and get the intent of the commission's condition in language on the ODP between now and the city council public hearing.
I'm comfortable with staff working on that.
Okay.
Like I said, my intent is I really like to see some height.
Sure.
And some density, make this a dense project and not just sprawling, because it's a unique site for Wheat Ridge.
Absolutely, totally agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, to your point, Mr. Chair, we've all approved a lot of mixed-use rezoning lately, where all of a sudden, after it gets approved, it just is one use, whether it's all residential or all commercial.
And it's maybe just even a single story.
Yeah, and so I think that might be just for the benefit of folks out there. That's why we're talking through this so extensively. So for that condition, then, is there a particular way we want to?
I would leave that as I had, and you can add if you want, to have staff, work with the applicant on that. Because that's.
Yeah, I don't think it's even necessary.
Okay.
If I think we can just work on the language that'll implement that.
Okay, all right. So we currently have a motion made and seconded on the table?
Yes.
Okay.
Any more discussion? Call for a vote.
Motion carried, 5-1.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we will now be moving to old business. What is the old business?
I don't think there is any.
No old business? Okay. Any new business?
Nope. I believe we will not be having a hearing on the 1st. Is that correct, Tammy? But there may be one on the 15th, just a heads up.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Call for vote.
Motion passed, 6-0.
Thank you.